Hi, my name's Danny Roth, and for better or worse, you'll be seeing me again later in this program as I host a roundtable discussion exploring the OCA's plan for camp. That unscripted conversation will anchor our program, a program which will also include short messages from the OCA, its membership, health leaders, and some thoughts on the meaning of camp from some truly great kids. That's what's to come over the next 75 minutes or so. But I'm here with you right now at the start of our program, safely isolated and alone in a production studio. The cameras have been set to record and the crew is in another room, so no mask. Truthfully though, I wasn't always supposed to be here. Our production plans envisioned for tonight's broadcast never called for me to be the first friend of camp you'd hear from. But if COVID-19 has taught us anything, it's that things in Ontario during a pandemic can and do change, and change comes quickly. Given that, we thought it was important to give you a bit of a look behind the scenes into tonight's presentation. The program you're about to watch has been pre-recorded, a decision we felt would ensure a seamless production and one free from technical glitches. Although we continue to believe that this was indeed the right production decision, given the speed of developments in the province of late, the rise in COVID infections, the spread of the variants, changes to school programs, and the head-spinning transitions from shutdowns to lockdowns to stay-at-home orders, we thought it was important at the start to let you know that what you're about to see was recorded days and in some places even weeks ago, and that some of the content may, at this point, seem a bit blind to what's going on around us. So now, just 48 hours or so from our premiere, we wanted to make sure that we reflected in as close to real time as possible an acknowledgement of the challenging times we're all facing. Clearly, conditions are changing. But what has never changed is the OCA's public position that in 2021, kids need camp. That we must plan for a summer with day camps and overnight camps and outdoor education programs. But that camp should only happen if the conditions related to COVID-19 allow us to safely do so. The situation today is indeed dark, perhaps in some ways darker than it's ever been. And we're certain that no camp professional, no parent, camper, or friend of camp would ever call for us to operate in these current conditions. But we're also certain that with continued community efforts to stop the spread, a more fulsome vaccine program, and continued government efforts, this darkness will eventually lift, and brighter days, they'll return. And we're planning for that day, and we're planning for camp. We continue to believe that a return to camp, a return to nature, a return to friendships, to physical activity and human connections will be needed when things eventually get better. Needed perhaps like never before. Truthfully, not one of us knows exactly when that date will arrive, but we do know that at that time, that's the time when it will matter most. We also know that camps won't be open and shouldn't be opened unless the pandemic subsides and the scientific community believes it's responsible to do so. That if we don't plan for camp this summer, then we can't have camp this summer. That if we do, that if we hope, and if we plan for better times, then maybe, just maybe, Ontario camps can be there to catch Ontario's youth at the moment when they need us most. Tonight, we're lighting a path back to camp, and we thank you for joining us.
Hi there, my name is Heather Davidson, and I'm the president of the Ontario Camps Association.
Hi, I'm Joy Levy. I'm the executive director with the Ontario Camps Association.
For nearly 90 years, the OCA has been supporting camps and outdoor education centers across the province, providing over 600 standards for accredited members that allow them to offer camps that are not only safe, but also fun, engaging, and educational.
We aren't a licensing body.
And we are not a division of the government.
The OCA currently has over 400 members, including our day and overnight camps and outdoor education centers. The OCA impacts over 400,000 children, and our members hire over 45,000 staff annually.
Our membership is made up of small businesses and not-for-profit organizations, and our campers and staff represent the same rich diversity that is reflected in our society as a whole.
Many of our member camps support and engage the special needs community, are not-for-profits, and serve the disadvantaged.
The OCA is a voluntary, non-profit organization that is not only leading the way for today's campers, but working to pave a welcoming and inclusive path forward for camps and campers alike.
We invite you to reach out to us at the OCA to learn more about the work involved. Tonight, we're going to highlight some of the very important work that we've been doing for the past year.
In March 2020, the OCA board struck a COVID-19 task force to share the most up-to-date information and resources on COVID-19. For the spring of 2020 and well into the summer and beyond, this group worked tirelessly to support an industry that was hit hard.
In 2021, the task force evolved but didn't let up. We are working day and night with a team of experts to create guidelines for a safe 2021 camp season and help return a sense of hope to the industry.
There have been a lot of difficult experiences over the past year. One thing that I personally valued was how the camp community has really rallied together and supported one another. And while the virtual campfire is never going to warm our hearts nearly as much as the real thing does, the empathy, optimism, and grit of the community has certainly acted as a beacon through the fog of a global pandemic.
Tonight, we're reaching out to all of you, inviting you to join us around the campfire and learn more about the plan for camp in 2021.
So put on your favorite camp shirt.
Pull up a chair and listen in as we all work together to find our path back to camp.
I kind of just forget about them, and then right when the camp ends, I'm like, wait, oh, I forgot I had parents. Where are you guys?
What do you miss most about camp?
You can just be yourself and no one will judge you.
All the counselors that were so funny and fun.
Seeing all my friends and going on the bus for like 3 hours just with them.
So you enjoy the bus ride to camp?
Yeah.
There is something special about that.
Seeing all the counselors.
Being able to see my friends, I miss the social life.
What's your favorite activity?
Probably archery.
Would you be able to hit that target probably?
Probably.
If you could add any activity to camp that's not there yet, what would you want to add?
Maybe bungee jumping.
If there was any day you could just stay up all night, just doing what you want, playing board games.
Harrison, Head of Land Sports, 2034.
Yes.
I see it. You're gonna do it.
Do you like camp more than you like school?
Yes.
Why?
Cause no math, no homework.
Do you think your parents miss you?
I'm not sure. Hard to say. I'm a handful. I'm quite energetic, so I think it's a good vacation for them.
Are you a good camper?
I think so.
Yeah.
I am a very talkative person.
A lot of times people think I have to be this way or else people are going to think I'm weird. But at camp, a lot of people understand you.
Or a lot of people are weird.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. I would like to thank the Ontario Camp Association for the opportunity to address all of you today as we begin to think about the summer of 2021 and what we can do to offer our children the opportunity to attend day camps and overnight camps. Here in Ontario, we are currently experiencing the third wave of the coronavirus pandemic, and we are seeing an unprecedented number of cases each day that are currently pressuring our healthcare system in ways we have never seen before. We are in an incredibly serious situation, and it is critical that we all do whatever we can to change course immediately. One might rightfully argue that with this third wave and most schools closed due to uncontrolled community transmission, it may not be the best time to discuss summer camps. However, it is important to prepare and plan for the summer so camps can be ready to safely open up if community transmission is low enough to permit us to do so. Over the last year, we have seen how the pandemic had and continues to have significant physical and mental health impacts on our children, who have undoubtedly been the unheard voices of this pandemic. My Hero is You. This is the title of a book that was published by UNICEF on April 9th, 2020, at a time when children's lives were completely upended, with the majority of children living in countries with some form of restricted movement or lockdown. With the input from over 1,700 children, parents, caregivers, and teachers, this book tells the story of the fantasy creature Ariel and helps explain how children can protect themselves, their family, and friends from the coronavirus, and how to manage difficult emotions when confronted with the new and rapidly changing reality. I think it was an incredible act of foresight by UNICEF to recognize that this pandemic will have a significant impact on children worldwide, and that it is our children, the future of our society, that need attention, protection, and support to avoid the long-lasting impacts during what is clearly a historically challenging time. And while it may be fair to say that many of us were concerned about our children, little did we know back then what the actual impact of this pandemic will have on children and youth. And I argue we are still at the beginning of realizing some of those impacts. In Ontario alone, over 160,000 children are waiting longer than is clinically safe for surgeries or other procedures, as well as developmental or mental health care. This is an untenable and unacceptable situation. As my friend and colleague Alex Munter from CHIO said so eloquently, every day matters in the life of a child. Over the last year, we have witnessed an unprecedented increase in severe cases of children and youth with eating disorders, and we are seeing more children seeking support for mental health problems than ever before. In addition, during the months of isolation, we have also witnessed the negative impact on the physical health of children and youth beyond the wait times in our sector that I mentioned to you earlier. I give you an example. The meal delivery and vaccination programs offered in schools are lifelines for many families who would otherwise struggle to access healthy food and preventative medical care. Many children were spending prolonged periods of time, and still are, at home without adequate supervision, resulting in both a reduction of physical activity and an increase in preventable injuries. And while I argue that we have significantly underestimated the impact school closures have on children of all socioeconomic backgrounds, those who have vulnerable home situations are particularly high risk without daily in-person schools, where teachers and school staff may be the first to identify cases of abuse or neglect. COVID-19 has amplified a lot of previously existing challenges in our healthcare system and in our society. The reality is, not everyone is experiencing this virus, nor feeling its impact the same way. When the Ontario Camp Association made the decision last year to only open a few day camps, it was the right decision at that time. We didn't know as much about the virus and the dynamic of the pandemic back then. However, the situation is different now. We know much more about how to lower the risk of transmission, how to test, how to treat cases of the virus, and of course, we now have safe and effective vaccines that are being rolled out all across the province. As an eternal optimist, I hope that we will be able to drive down cases over the coming weeks and months so that we reach a level of community transmission by the summer that will allow us to open camps for every child in Ontario who is interested in participating in camp activities. Given the significant impact this pandemic has had on the physical and mental health of our children, it's important to be fully prepared so our children can enjoy a summer of fun activities, which includes a lot of well-recognized benefits such as building resiliency, a stimulating social environment with other children and camp staff, as well as experiences around team building and leadership. Over the last year, we have learned a lot about the bundled measures of infection, prevention, and control that can mitigate the risk of transmission in various scenarios, including schools and camps. A significant aspect of these measures include a robust testing and tracing strategy that can be employed for day and overnight camps, and that will be further able to help mitigate any risk of infection and transmission. I have to give a tremendous amount of credit to the Ontario Camp Association, who have worked and continue to work diligently on plans to implement these bundled infection prevention and control measures. A team of experts here at Sick Kids has reviewed these plans, and we will continue to assist the Ontario Camp Association in their development of a safe plan for opening day and overnight camps, which will include a robust testing and tracing strategy and any other advice we can provide. We are also witnessing a significant increase in vaccinations across the province, which now includes teachers and childcare providers, and if current vaccine supply continues as planned, I expect that most camp staff will have at least received 1 dose of a vaccine by the time camps will open, which will hopefully be an added measure to safely open summer camps this year. With the hope that the pandemic situation will significantly improve over the next few weeks and months, I'm confident that camps will have the tools and resources necessary to operate carefully, responsibly, and safely. While we are now fighting to combat the third wave, we owe it to our children to be prepared to open camps so our kids can have the structure and activities that help them thrive over the summer. For now, we must all do our part to stay home, follow local public health guidelines, and keep our families and communities safe. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. We're really fortunate right now to be joined by three camp and outdoor education leaders, three individuals who have really dedicated certainly their professional lives to summer camp, to outdoor education, to wellness and health of children. Before I introduce the group, I just want to give you a sense of how this conversation is going to go. And I was quite specific in using the word conversation. The hope is that the audience is going to be able to listen in to a conversation between colleagues that is going to take them through an understanding of where we are today, what happened a year ago, and what the future looks like. My role is hopefully to stay pretty silent through this conversation. And if I have any objective today, it is to try and ask the questions that I think the parents and the kids at home who are watching would like to ask if they had the opportunity. I'm a father. I was a camp kid growing up. I'm the father of a hopeful second-year staff member this year. I assume Billy is watching as well right now. So that's really our role, is to try and get you guys to share with the audience and to answer the questions that they have. I guess, you know, certainly coming after Ronnie's comments, if I can kind of start by amplifying one of the issues that Ronnie raised, or Dr. Cohen raised. Look, we are at the darkest period, arguably, of this pandemic in the last 14 months. And here we are talking about camp, advocating for the opening of camp. I'm a PR guy and I'm somewhat acutely aware of tone and what seems appropriate to other people's ears. Jack, is now really the time that we should, with all that's going on, that we should be talking about camp? Do we not have other things that parents should be thinking about? Schools, general health? Why camp? Why now?
Well, thanks for putting me on the hot seat for that, but it's a question that has to be asked. These are extraordinary times. We've all suffered in so many different ways over the past 13 months now. And we are so sensitive, and we are not tone deaf to those who have suffered in various ways. We know the people who are listening to this event and well beyond its perimeters have suffered to varying degrees. They've suffered all of the things that Dr. Cohen has mentioned, and some have suffered losses. They've lost friends or family members. And we're also sensitive to the businesses that have suffered as well. I just heard 60,000 businesses closed over the course of the pandemic. All of those things are not lost on us. But notwithstanding, Danny, I think we as an association, the OCA, and every single camp, we all feel duty bound to continue working towards getting camps in a position so that they can deliver a careful, responsible, and safe program for the summer. And that requires us to get this planning completed so that we're in a position when we get onto the other side of this fog that we're in right now. And that time will come as the vaccine rollouts accelerate and as people follow their requirements through this lockdown. We would be remiss if we got to the point where the pandemic conditions have abated in late May and June, and we aren't in a state of readiness to do what we all think we can, which is provide that huge shot in the arm for the kids that may be as important, if not more important, than the vaccines, but our role in restoring mental and physical and social health. So we can't wait until June to do that. That's why we're talking about it now.
So I'm assuming that anybody who thinks that we're talking about opening today, not just opening, but operating today, that's clearly not the case. I mean, we're in a preparatory phase right now, are we not?
We are, and it's not one-dimensional. It's complicated. We have to work with public health so that we can get guidelines in place. And then we, as an association, want to provide camps specific suggestions and a field guide so that they can operationalize those guidelines that become the law. And it's tricky. Camp operations are complicated, from food service to hygiene and sanitation and all of that stuff. So yeah, our runway is significant. And most camps, this may sound ridiculous to some people, but a lot of camps, our camp, every other camp, we're certain of it, they didn't start planning for this summer today. They didn't start in September. In some ways, we started a year ago looking at capital expenditures and staffing has started, registrations are there. And there's not just a group of camps that are waiting. There's 40,000 staff in Ontario that come to work at camps. There's over 500,000 to 600,000 campers, so everyone is waiting. Parents want to know what's going on, and we need to breathe a level of confidence in them that we're prepared and we've got a plan. And we do have a plan. We just need public health and the political support to make it happen and happen as soon as possible.
This is not a situation where we're going to try and debate who is suffering worse, who has it worse, what industry, what age group, what demographic. Certainly, we can recognize that province-wide, this is a challenge. But I think Ronnie said, Emmett, we'll talk in more length shortly about the mental health component of this thing. But Ronnie used a phrase that he said, not to misquote him, but I believe he said that children are undoubtedly the unheard voices of this pandemic. What does that mean?
Well, I'm a pediatric social worker, and I can say that I hear their voices every day, and that I've heard their voices for now over 365 days since we've been in this pandemic. And their voices are overwhelmingly loud to me, which is what's happening out there with children and adolescents and young adults is frightening. You know, camp is something, it's more than just a place where kids go to play in the summer. It gives them a sense of community. It allows them to build independence. It allows them to build feelings of accomplishment, true resilience, and having to be away from parents, whether it's outdoor rec, day camp, overnight camp. You're bonding with other kids and other staff members and trusted adults in a way that is so unique, that contributes to these kids' mental health in a way that I have never seen before. I grew up at camp, so I do have a special place for camp in my heart, but to see how much these children and adolescents have been truly grieving, in the truest sense of the word, where I remember when the news came on last year when camp was closed, and it was like a movie scene where my phone was blowing up with parents, with university students, with high school students crying, saying, what do I do? Because camp offers that optimism and hope that we need to actually keep going and logging on to virtual school that we're not interested in, and we know that we're falling behind, because we just need to get to camp. We need to get to the fun, the happiness. And I'm really worried that if camp or outdoor ed environments do not open this summer, the profound impact it will have on youth, on their prolonged loneliness, on the increasing levels of anxiety, on the decline in their mood and significant depression. I'm starting to get younger and younger children who say to me, I don't want to get out of bed anymore. It's quite scary. And camp does give them something to get out of bed for, literally. So their voices are very loud to me, and the voices say that they need to go to camp.
Marika, that resilience that camp gives, and I think we have to be very clear that we are the Ontario Camps Association, but outdoor ed programs fall under that overarching association. We talked about your bio, talking about grit. I mean, I think it seems the right time to kind of, at least early in this conversation, to talk about the resilience and the grit and what interaction with nature in normal circumstances, in your opinion, what does that do for our kids?
I mean, there's a ton that I could say about it, and I think Emma hit the nail on the head. I mean, when we talk about grit, we're talking about resilience, we're talking about social emotional skills, which Emma just spoke really well about. And, this is a tough time. And so are we building resilience? Are youth building resilience? Absolutely. Sure. Yes. And is that different than the resilience and the grit that you would learn in an outdoor education setting, at a camp setting? Absolutely. You talk to youth who've been on a canoe expedition, for example, and portaging a boat through the pouring rain down a muddy trail and working as a team in order to do that, to share that load, to be close with others and be able to identify their needs through their body language. Here we are in this world where we're communicating through screens predominantly, and that includes youth who are learning these really important skill sets that are not, we can talk about body language in this kind of platform, but when you're on that portage trail and you see that youth ahead of you whose legs might be struggling a little bit, or you're at an outdoor education center and you're looking at the small insects and you see someone's, body language do that, you pick up on these things and you learn how to respond to them and how to really support those people and in that circumstance. And those are things that this platform doesn't allow for. And so while this is a challenging time, challenge does not equal resilience building and grit building in the same way that these opportunities allow. And we see the education system even moving this way. The focus on social emotional learning in the Ontario Ministry of Education has been increasing its profile even more over the last few years, which is wonderful. I mean, that's what we focus on at Outward Bound for sure, but that's what happens at outdoor education centers, is that real learning that comes through the connection. And we can talk about overnight camps that are 5 days in length, 32 days in length, varying, but we're also talking about those opportunities that students have to leave their urban center and go to a green space that's not so far away, where they can have those interactions in nature, have those opportunities to build that learning that's actually really accessible to where their school is and to where their home is. And I think those opportunities to build grit in the outdoors and connect with nature and have all those health benefits has just been almost entirely cut off. And I'm sure we're going to talk about equity later on, but that's another factor in all of that as well.
No, absolutely. I'm struck a little bit. Look, I think that although, we're only talking about 14 months ago from when this started, and in some ways it feels like forever ago. And in some bizarre way, it also feels like it just happened yesterday. So, Marika, the purpose of this conversation is to kind of get a sense of where we are and where we're going. I think that's part of the objective of tonight's program. But I don't think you can do that without kind of looking back at where we were. So Emma talked about the calls and her phone blowing up and the tears. We know that, God, I think it was a state of emergency was declared in March 2020. I think overnight camps were shut down in May. I think we only got guidance for day camp in June of that year. So Marika, let's start with you and your program and what happened last spring. And then Jack, give us a little insight as to what the camping industry experienced heading into the summer of 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. The beginning of the pandemic to me is very tied in with working with youth outdoors. It was March break, really, that all of this started to evolve. It was the public school March break time. And we, in fact, had an expedition in Algonquin Park for the winter. And every day we were on the phone, every hour we were on the phone as the news was evolving. And it's really interesting looking back, because we had the opportunity then as an organization to build policies for COVID, because it was the really early stages before we were shut down. And those principles, in fact, are the same principles that are in the guidelines today. It's distancing, it's sanitizing, it's masking, and all of those things. So it's interesting to look at that. But essentially, that the first stay-at-home order came in during that March break period. So we closed our program down. We sent people home. Interestingly, we had people who came to the program from across the country even. So it's, a very different world now than it was then. So it's really, for me, looking back, I mean, it's so tied to the work that I do and the youth that we work with, and fascinating to think of the conversations we had with the youth then in the field. And then it was a full, as we know, it was a full shutdown. And so outdoor education centers who would have had a spring program, our schools are all virtual. They're not in person at that point in time. And then even, throughout the summer, the day camps eventually were able to open. But then looking to the fall, again, we had day camps that were open and after school programs that were open, but the school outdoor ed programs, whether it's directly linked to a school board or, the conservation areas that run outdoor ed programs, or our programs that we run with schools, we weren't able to operate at all. So those youth, and it's so fascinating to me, because we also see an uptick in enrollments in forest school and alternative school programs, and those programs getting calls, just as Emma's saying, that are off the charts. But the public school system really was not able to respond in a way that was able to support those youth in having those opportunities to engage with nature and outdoors, despite all of the news articles saying that is 100% what we should be doing. Our schools, the teachers have done a tremendous job trying to adapt, but the outdoor ed centers haven't been able to support those teachers and those students who are really, I think, needing those opportunities and experiences.
Yeah, particularly because I think a lot of those kids that you serve, that is their opportunity through your program.
Yeah.
Jack, you serve at New Moon, a different community, and the OCA certainly serves a diverse population. But when did you get the call? as a camp owner personally? Tell us what happened.
Well, it evolved after the declaration of emergency, and we began in March. We all knew something bad was coming, but we were also naive and hopeful that this would pass. And I was one of the folks that would say, I think we're going to be okay if we get into June. And so when Premier Ford stood up, I think it was on May 17th, and declared that summer camps would not be able to operate, we knew bad things were unfolding. Even though we were sort of mentally, intellectually prepared, no one was really prepared. No one could fathom the emotion, and it was such a constellation of feelings. Camps weren't just dealing with the emotional fallout of what they witnessed amongst their campers and their staff, who live on to borrow a phrase, a 10 to 2 month basis, waiting for those 10 months to pass so that they can spend, if they were lucky and fortunate enough, 2 months at camp. So when we tried and we fought and we pushed it to the end of our limits with scrambling to develop guidance, which ironically are not that different than what is under review now. But there we were. And we were faced with the business consequences of it, and camps from across the OCA and not unlike other businesses were faced with terrible decisions to make. And, to lose an entire year's worth of income was catastrophic enough. But I'll tell you, for me personally, and for I know so many other camps that held virtual first night of camp gatherings or campfires for us on a Friday night, to see the heartbreak. It was, I'm getting emotional now thinking about it. It was something that no one has experienced who lives and breathes their work. We don't take our work home. We don't leave our work at home and get busy with life. It becomes, for many of us as camp operators, owners, it's what you do and who you are as much as, how you make a living. And to see the heartbreak amongst the campers and the staff was heartbreaking. And we were so fortunate to be up at camp all summer long. But I have to tell you, it was whether the sun was out, not a cloud was in the sky, there was a haunting sadness every day. And people were so generous with us, our families, knowing that next year we'll come back. So we were fortunate to have that, but it was just an experience that camp owners and parents and campers and staff never want to go through again. So that's how it felt. That's the honest to God feeling.
It's funny. It's one of those industries where if you know, you know. And I think the audience with us tonight is predominantly a camp community. So, Emma, I think it's going to be important to kind of talk to that audience about the things they were seeing in their homes at that time as being things that were happening widespread. But I think it's also interesting to talk about the fact that if you haven't been fortunate to experience day camp or overnight camp for a weekend, a week, a month, 2 months, if you haven't been able to participate in an Outward Bound program, and you're seeing the devastation across the province, there is not a sector or a family not struggling right now. You couldn't blame people who are not camp people for going, come on. Like, all right, so you didn't have flagpole for 2 months. Emma, what is so unique about this experience for these kids that you described it at one point as a loss?
That's one of my favorite questions, because when I think about camp personally, and now having experience through my clients and their families, starting up with the parents all the way down to the youngest kid who's probably 4. Camp is a world. It's an imaginative, magical world that you get to participate in and be involved in, where you get to meet people, do activities that you would never get to do, participate in programs, be enthusiastic with a part of a group where this magic happens outside. Like, I have goosebumps thinking about it, because it's simply an environment that cannot be replicated, even if you have the best hockey team, even if you have an amazing teacher at school, right? You're living together or spending the summer together in this group of people where they become literally your second family. So to have experienced that loss almost a year ago, what I can comment on, right, was the grief last year. But as that grief has been prolonged, as the anxiety and sadness has been prolonged, the clients that I met earlier into the pandemic look and feel very different than the clients that I'm meeting today. And I think that's really why I'm here. That's really why I'm here to advocate for seeing children, seeing adolescents, and seeing young adults, all of which who would have had job opportunities, would have had leadership opportunities, would have had community feel away from their screens. I'm not even going to touch that today, right? But to have an opportunity to be with other kids, they lost that. And as a result, the mental health, I know it's been said all the time, the mental health of youth is dire. It's desperate, and it's really lacking that community, that need for play, that need for independence outside of the house, without parents, with other kids, without gaming. It's essential, because what I worry about, and this is what a lot of myself and my pediatric colleagues in mental health, is the lasting impact of missing, missing camp for 1 year, but missing camp for 2 years, or missing summer opportunities and play and community for 2 years. Those are formative years for a child and adolescent's development. They're formative years for a child's ability to connect with another person. Like Marika says, that socio-emotional development, it's essential. I notice a child when I meet them in session and they can't detect facial expressions. They don't understand the way a peer is connecting to them on their screens in class. And we need to repair that, because I'm starting to become increasingly anxious myself about what will happen down the road as a result of this pandemic, as a result of all of the opportunities these kids and teenagers have missed, because that could potentially cause some real severe harm.
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
I'd just love to add to that, because we talk about camp. There are these camps that have this wonderful history, and I think Jack's story speaks to that, where you have kids who've grown up at a camp from a very young age, and they go year on year on year, and it really becomes a part of their life and a part of their community. And I think for outdoor ed centers and for some day camps and for Outward Bound and other programs like ours, you might not have that same kind of year-on-year investment. And so when you're talking to families who don't know camp, who say, so what, it's camp, what's the big deal? When I think of outdoor ed centers, or I think of those small experiences too, I think exactly of what Emma just said. What is the lasting impact if youth don't have these experiences? And I think that's relevant whether it's a short-term experience, or you've gone to that same camp from the age of 5 to then becoming a staff member later on. I think that impact is measurable, but the impact of this pandemic in the opposite direction, we don't know what that's going to be. I mean, we talked to youth and parents last summer who said, my child hasn't set foot outside since March. And those are not rare stories. So I think whether it's it's explaining the benefit of like an overnight camp, like New Moon, for example, or the benefit of a short-term experience. That impact is still present. If a kid hasn't had that experience before and the outdoor ed center isn't open, or they don't have that day camp opportunity that kind of opens that world to them, that impact is lasting.
I could even jump in one more time to add to that, which is no matter what the program is, overnight, day camp, outdoor ed, I think the one thing we keep hearing is that these kids have lacked structure for over a year. Yep. The structure, the calendar, the activities, right? The organization. And these opportunities allow them to have the structure in an outdoor environment that's not just playing Fortnite for 7 hours a day.
It's so interesting to talk about structure in what is, to me, this natural environment. And I was struck, Marika, and I don't know whether you can or want to speak to this, but in doing, look, I thought I knew camp, but I've done a little bit of further research in prep for today. One of the phrases that jumped out at me that I admittedly had never heard before was forest bathing. And this sense of the redemptive, remediative sort of impacts, the positive benefits of being less about structure, but being in nature, which I would imagine is very important to the kind of programs that you offer.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, forest bathing derives from what I understand is a Japanese cultural practice. And we're seeing that more and more around the world. But in essence, it's just that it's time in nature, and contemplative time in nature is something I would add to that. So, as part of our programs, we always try to incorporate a solo experience. And I think a lot of camps are doing that. Ours can look quite different depending on what kind of program you're in, and they can get quite long as well. But it's often one of the pieces that when we talk to youth and parents before the expedition, that they're most curious about. They want to know the most about that time alone in nature, where you're supervised from a distance, but you're going to be spending time by yourself, and you're not going to have anything electronic, and you're not going to have, those things that we're now surrounded by at home. You're going to just be yourself with a basic shelter and some food and nature. And, it's interesting because the questions that people have going into that, and the anxiety and the trepidation and the unsureness and the I don't want to be very far and can I pull the plug when I want to questions, versus the end, it's often, in Outward Bound, we've been in Canada for 50 years, but that's often one of the things that we hear from folks the most about is that solo opportunity, be it an afternoon or a couple of days, that is the most impactful thing that they have had. And I think even for me, I'm someone who loves the benefits of meditation myself, and I'm not even talking about meditating in nature, but right now I find myself living in Toronto, surrounded by technology, confined to the condo that I live in, with an outdoor space that is very frequented, but I'm very fortunate to have outside my door. And I think, my gosh, I would just love a few quiet hours sitting in nature, without that bustling around me. And I can feel that relaxation set in when I talk about that. And that's in essence, that piece that you're referencing, that forest bathing, that quiet contemplative time where you're just surrounded by nature. And I think everybody's been engaging in the nature that's outside their door in greater numbers than ever before, and have probably seen the seasons change in a way never before, or noticed the birds sing in a way that they've never noticed before. And I think whether you're in Toronto or Ottawa or Huntsville or, a really small town, I think we are having these opportunities to engage with that outside our door in a different way because of this shelter and home situation, but that concept of contemplative time in nature is so beneficial. And I see Emma smiling, so I'm sure
It made me so relaxed. Or the way you explained that, sounds so lovely.
And Danny, if I can just jump in for a sec, I can't impart enough how much broader the camp experience is than what people think it is. I mean, there's no question, every camp person would love to see every single child in Ontario have that experience. And we try. You know, I think there's statistics that will show that up to 50% of the kids who go to overnight camps get there because they've received some form of financial assistance. There's, you know, charities like Amiki or Kids in Camp that I'm affiliated with. Our sole purpose in those charities are to assist the kids who may not have the financial resources. That's sort of part one. Part two is that schools that run outdoor education programs, whether it's in the fall where some of the mandate is not just outdoor education, but it's believed to be a coming together and a unifying opportunity, or in the spring as a reward combined with an outdoor education experience for kids who are graduating. They didn't just happen by fluke. They happened because there was an understanding that camps provided a very unique opportunity for an exposure to that kind of a setting. I'll never forget, you know, 35 years ago when we hosted a school group, and it was a school from the center of Toronto, comprised mostly of kids who, you know, had never been out of the city, let alone in a canoe or in a pile of, you know, a puddle of mud looking for frogs. And these weren't children from the most prestigious locations in Toronto. These were kids who had no capacity for the luxuries that some camps may be perceived to have. But this was the look on their eyes and the joy that they had was one thing, and was an amazing thing. And the other thing I want to say is that the 40,000 kids or youth or young adults that come to camp, I can't help but think that we're a better society because of the opportunities for leadership that they have. That whether they end up as teachers because they love kids through their experience at camp, or they become lawyers or CEOs of companies, that experience that they get there, it has value added to them as individuals. So we're not just talking about kids, rich kids that go to expensive camps. We're talking about every possible opportunity that this orbit of camp provides. So I think it was important just to share that, because that's the reality too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Jack. I mean, I just had an email exchange with an alumni last week who did a program with us, I think 5 years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago. And she came with her school. She was a new Canadian who'd immigrated from Iran and, you know, was having some challenges at home, had recently lost her father. And, you know, she's given me permission to share her story. And, you know, she came and she did an outdoor ed program with us through an organization that she was affiliated with. It was tied to a high school credit that she then achieved. You know, she then went on to pursue further education. She's graduated with an international development diploma. She had the opportunity to meet, you know, Trudeau, but it's interesting to hear her speak about the impact of having that experience that was funded to do outdoor ed with her school. And it was at a really crucial time in her life where she was feeling, you know, just finishing high school, don't know what to do, and with family loss added on top of that. And she talks about cutting a tree down to feed the fire while she was winter camping. And she says, you know, if I can learn to start a fire, I can learn to start my life. And when she said that, I nearly fell over. I mean, it doesn't get better than that to hear that from somebody that you've worked with. I mean, she's an incredible young woman.
It does not. And I'm so glad that you guys organically touched on what was going to be my next question about diversity and sort of the richness of the camp community, not the literal richness, but just the diversity of this community. Look, I think the audience, we got to be cognizant of people's time tonight because this group could talk for hours. And I want to move the conversation along to sort of where we are and where we're going. But I think it's really important, Jack, even briefly, there's still almost a year later, a bit of confusion about what happened last summer. Overnight was closed in Ontario. Day camp sort of was open. camps ran in Eastern Canada, the camps in the US ran overnight camps. Let's just spend a couple minutes on what actually happened last summer and what were the learnings from that?
Well, I think the reason that overnight camps were, the decision came not to operate was really out of, I think as Ronnie mentioned in his talk, there was an abundance of caution and concern, and we just didn't know. Health officials weren't clear about how children would deal with COVID, what the extent of their vulnerability was, whether or not, how would an overnight camp setting look. And I'll be very frank, there were a lot of us that were surprised to learn that day camps were going to open, but overnight camps couldn't because of our ability to sort of bubble and isolate. That was then, this is now, and as Dr. Cohen said, we know a lot more now. And all of those decisions across Canada are, of course, locally determined by each province. And in the States, similarly, most camps didn't operate, but many did. And, I think you're wanting to know, what was the experience like in those camps? Is that correct?
Sure.
First of all, the day camps that operated in Ontario, about 60 of them operated across the country, and they operated flawlessly. There was no outbreak of COVID. They had health guidance, public health guidance, and of course they had their own detailed protocols that enabled them to comply to the guidance in a way that was appropriate for their camp. And the parents and the kids and the staff, high levels of compliance and great success. And the reason why many other day camps didn't operate was because transportation was prohibited because of that concern. And remember, back then, schools had closed for many weeks before, so there's no concept of whether or not transportation would be safe in that climate. In the United States, and this is now data that's being published by CDC and in another couple of journals, roughly 90,000 children in day camps and overnight camps. And the key findings were, number one, the guidance was important. Number two, testing was important. And all of the public health measures that guidance provided, whether it's physical distancing, wearing masks indoors, and distancing and being in the outdoors, and that's baked into the camp experience, of course, conferred tremendous risk mitigation. And I think two or three key findings. One, day camp, overnight camps, in the camps that operated, of course, an equally low level of COVID risk. So the perceptions that day camp was safer than overnight camp, I think were dispelled by a significant amount of data. And number two, reducing camp capacity had nothing to do with COVID case rates. What had to do with it was all of the public health measures that were put into place, logical ones, physical distancing, placing kids in cohorts so that you could contact trace, having sound guidance in place. And I think we learned a lot from that. And as a result, we have experts that are part of sick kids and other health professionals that feel confident that, they were the test cases in ways. So there's what happened over the course of last summer. And that's what's given fuel to the belief that in the appropriate pandemic conditions, when things are more stable, and we are pretty certain, we all are hoping that that happens, then camps will be well positioned to operate no less safely, if not more safely than the successful camps that did last summer.
So if we closed overnight camps, limited day camps, impacted outdoor ed programs late last spring out of an abundance of caution, then last summer and the months that followed and the abundance of evidence, I assume we're good. We open? Where are we now? Because I don't think we are, correct?
Open?
Well, I mean, what's left to talk about? What is the status right now? Are camps, overnight camps, able to operate in 21?
Well, we are still we're not just in the fog of the pandemic, we're in the fog of decision making. And I mean, that's the $64,000 question. I've been asked that question so many times, I should be a multi-billionaire if it's a $64,000 question. There are two components. One is overnight camps remain technically closed by regulation. And the government has assured us that that regulatory change can occur very rapidly, so long as the public health guidelines are in place. So that's the second piece. So we've been working with public health, the Office of the Chief Medical Officer of Health now since November, contributing to the revision of day camp guidance and to the new development that we were invited to prepare with support and review by Sick Kids. And that's being in their hands. And just today, and I'm not afraid to say this, as at the time of recording, we've been promised that those overnight camp guidance drafts will appear in my inbox tomorrow. And so that's a great step forward so that we'll be able to get at those and review them and provide comments and concerns if there are some. And day camp guidance revisions are in play as well. For example, they accept that transportation can be done safely. They've expanded the sizes of the cohorts to match what reality is on the ground. So where are things at? Public health is understandably cautious, and we're mindful of the fact that I wouldn't want their jobs now. I wouldn't want to be in the office of the Chief Medical Officer of Health last week. I mean, they're dealing with issues on a second-to-second, minute-to-minute, day-by-day basis. What gives me confidence, some confidence and some hope, is that they've had eyes on this and they have acknowledged, and Dr. Williams, our Chief Medical Officer of Health, has a public letter stating he understands the importance of camp and its value. But things just aren't happening as quickly as we want them to. And we've tried to impart to them that we get it, you're busy, but our runway is getting shorter and shorter. And people have to realize that we don't wake up on June 15th, open the gate and walk in and say, how's everyone doing? If we want to have really sophisticated, granular, detailed plans in place so that we can run camps safely and responsibly, those plans need to start now. And we can only plan so far without those guidance documents, but thankfully, we've been told they're on their way.
And you've always said that those plans are all predicated on the conditions in the community, correct?
For sure. You know, our hope, I think everyone's hope, who doesn't have the hope that this lockdown and the race, if Tokyo wants to have their Olympics this summer, we want the vaccine and variants of concern Olympics to end quickly. And we all want the vaccine to win handily. And we know it will, but we want the fog of that pandemic to clear. And all things suggest that it will start to lift in May. And so we're not looking, no one here expects the government to call us and say, you know what, we know it's important for camps to operate, go ahead today. That's not what we're asking, of course not.
Emma, if last year you described as a loss, as a trauma and a loss and a grieving period, I know in my house with just a 16-year-old son who wants to go to camp, the uncertainty of this is a whole other set of issues for us to figure out. I can't even say to him, do your homework or you're not going to camp. We don't know as a family how to language that, how to limit expectations and not be negative, how to not, build up expectations only to disappoint our kids. What is this kind of current status? OCA is working, public health is working. We're all sort of aligned on the goal, but we certainly don't have any certainty yet. What's that doing to young people right now?
So when I'm explaining to a family where anxiety comes from, I would say that anxiety comes from a lack of predictability and a lack of control. And this would be a second year where families who are so desperate, and you mentioned the word trauma, right? These kids were grieving the loss of camp, which really could be a truly profound experience for some of these young people, was a trauma. My concern would be that if the unpredictability of camp not happening or happening, the uneasiness, the huge question mark. I mean, right now, we all know in every house of across the province, across the country is full and riddled with anxiety, that this uncertainty would add gasoline to that fire. And worse, this is maybe worse, shifting gears from anxiety, it's that I worry about kids who haven't experienced camp for 1 year, 2 years, that they would lose the steam and go, well, maybe I don't want to go to camp, or maybe I don't want to get outside. Maybe it's safer in my house. Maybe it's safer by myself. And that's when I refer to the prolonged concerns that I have, is that these kids need the opportunities. We need to capitalize on getting them to camp after they've missed a year, so that the uncertainty, the motivation, their willingness to participate in activities of daily life, like seeing people, getting outside, being in the sun, being with friends and loved ones, doing fun things, that we don't lose that motivation, because the motivation levels are already pretty low. So that would sort of be my concern.
So I'd love to just add just one thing to that. I mean, we've been talking about who we're talking about is youth. And we're also talking, some camps in particular serve special needs populations as well. And so everything that Emma just talked about is amplified when we think of those adult campers and those families who are needing to make those decisions for those folks who also are seeking out these opportunities. So just to highlight that as well, and not lose sight of them.
It's indeed a big tent.
It just sort of occurred to me that all of the suffering that we've experienced, all of the sacrifices that we're dealing with right now, it is in part for camp. And we've come too far. There's been too much trust and hope put in camps and the value of camps by campers and parents and staff. This is the moment to stick with the hope, because the payoff is coming. And, I feel, and every camp operator feels that they would be remiss if they didn't continue, because when we get onto the other side of that fog and clearer skies prevail, that's our reward. And this is what we're putting the time in for now. So it'll be worth the sacrifice.
It's a lovely pivot from Emma's comments about uncertainty to the certainty that camp professionals feel. And I think, you'll tell me if I'm wrong, Jack, but a certain sense, and Marika, that you and the COVID-19 task force at the OCA and your supporters in healthcare and public health, there's certainty, I believe, around the plan for camp. We've used that in our campaign as a bit of a hashtag. I would say to you, look, when parents make the decision to send their kids this summer, there are going to be those in-laws, friends, who are going to ask them in one way or another to justify the decision. Really? You're going to put your kid in this condition, in that environment? Are you crazy? But we're going to do it because we are going to trust in the OCA and trust in the leadership of the camp industry. But I think we would all benefit from if you can do it somewhat quickly, think we'd want to know, I mean, what is the plan? And I know there are variations between environments and day camp versus overnight camp, but for the thousands of people still with us, I hope, still tuning in, what's the plan?
Well, I'm happy to start. Marika is certainly capable to pipe in and fill in whatever gaps I leave. I think we're building a plan on the backbone of the Ontario Camps Association integrity and comprehensive set of standards. There's more than 600 that all of us have to adhere to. And that's how we operate our camps, with a strong sense of community responsibility and safety. And so that we can operate, as you know, Danny, you've drilled into us safely, and it is important, but responsibly and carefully. So getting to COVID, it's about mitigating risks. That's what camp people do. We very carefully risk manage, which is weighing the real potential risks of camp relative to the benefits. So practically speaking, we want to be able to drive down to the lowest possible extent possible the risk of COVID entering camps. So that includes a testing program, and it includes a pre-camp test, and another test as soon upon arrival as science dictates, so that we cover that umbrella of potential viral load. Won't get into those details. The kids will be in cohorts or households, and those households will operate as their own little orbits, keeping physically distanced from others. Where they can't be physically distanced to a satisfactory level, they'll wear masks. We'll shift, even though we're so dependent on outdoors and focused on outdoors, we'll shift even more activities to outdoors. So, you know, if we had 1 or 2 outdoor dining events a week, it may be 10 times that. We'll have outdoor plays, not indoor plays. We won't be able to stand up, we don't think, maybe it'll change, but we won't start off camp certainly standing up on our benches and yelling and screaming and cheering. We're going to have to take that outdoors. You know, we're not going to be, I mean, I'm not going to be able to stand at the head of the buffet outdoor when the kids are taking homemade, home-cut French fries, and I'm not going to be able to steal a few. We're going to have to change the way food is served. And when kids go to canoeing, they're going to have to, the instructor is going to have to wear a mask. And we're going to have all of those types of health measures in place. And you know, that's just on the prevention of the enhanced hygiene, frequent disinfection. But that's on the prevention side. We also have to bake into our program outbreak management plans. And we have to be as prepared with those things as we are for the mitigation of COVID entering camp, and because we may have a case of COVID. But more than anything, we need to be able to properly diagnose it and test people on site, and be prepared to deal with quarantining or isolation or contact tracing within those cohorts. That's a hint of some of the procedures that we're going to get into.
All right, anything to add on that question?
I mean, it's a great overview that Jack just gave. I mean, I think the reality is we have way more information now than we've ever had about this, and we're still learning a lot. I mean, that's what this current stay-at-home order is about, is, you know, the numbers are rising and we need to pay attention to that. But all of the practices that everybody in society has been hearing and learning about in the last year is exactly what we're going to be applying into the camp environment. So none of this is going to be new to anybody. And I think that's a bit of the reassuring piece, I think, on my side, is we are well practiced at throwing on a mask now. We are well practiced, arguably too so, at keeping distances. I recognize we need to, but you know, when we come out of this and can get close, are we going to be able to, is a question I have, but I'll save that for another conversation. But I think all of those things that are becoming ingrained in us will just be applied in the camp environment. And I mean, as Jack said, there's dining halls to think about, there's field games to think about, there's canoeing. I mean, I mentioned portaging. Luckily, canoe seats are a good distance apart already. So there's a win. So I think I don't have much to add to Jack, but I think, just listening to him rhyme those things off, that's exactly why the plan for camp needs to happen, and why we're really keen for these guidelines, is because there are so many of those little pieces to think about that we just need for us as an industry, and for parents and for youth, to be able to have that assuredness that all of those pieces have been put into place, and we know what standard we're going to be held to in order to do the best to mitigate all of the risks that are associated with this, because the consequences are real and we know that. So if we can put those pieces into place, train our staff really well, then I think we can take some youth outside and be able to have them have these opportunities that they haven't been able to have for the last year.
And that was Charlie, our camp dog, reminding me to say that it's not just us. It's the parents and campers and staff that I think are in such a state of readiness to help and to bring what they've got to bring, whether it's their own personalized non-medical masks, or deal with the transportation issues if we make decisions about that. I think that they're, at least my experience with our amazing clientele, and I think every camp can say the same, they're basically standing by saying, you tell us what we need to do and we'll do it.
I don't want to put anybody on the spot. Look, I think we have covered, I hope, and addressed a lot of the questions that Ontario's parents and campers have. We haven't answered all of them. I know the OCA is continuing to communicate with its stakeholders, with government, with health leaders, answering those very questions, and we will continue in that. So I hope that we've given people a pretty solid overview of where we are, why there's urgency, the responsible approach that nobody is saying at all costs do camps reopen. We've tried to make that case very clearly. And hopefully tonight, both in the segments ahead of us and to follow, we've made the case for the plan to camp. I certainly hope so. Bit of a weird finish, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but I'd love to pose the last question for you guys and ask you to kind of answer it in your own words. When the world and Ontario comes back to some semblance of normalcy, when the pandemic ends or the pandemic subsides to a level where we regain some control and a little bit of our old lives come back, the best place for Ontario's kids this summer is camp. Why? Emma, do you want to start?
Well, you put me on the spot.
Yeah, I apologize. But why is that the right place for our kids after this last 14? And you've touched on it tonight. I realize that, but
because it's essential, because they need it, because their physical, mental, emotional, social health depends on it. I firmly believe that. That's why I'm here. They need to be at camp.
Marika, when this is sort of abates and it's safe to return, why is an outdoor education program, being in nature, why is that the place for our kids this summer?
The skills that they learn are not skills that you can learn in any other setting. The opportunity to have risky play, to step outside your maturity gap, to build that community space, to build those connections with one another as peers in a supervised outdoor space. I mean, that it's just an experience like none other. And to be honest, I don't want to imagine a world where people are not connected to nature. They're not connected to each other, and they're not connected to the learning that happens in those spaces. That's a world that I'm not sure I want to live in.
Jack, I've had the fortune of working with the OCA and quite closely with you, really for me since December. I know that your involvement in this issue has gone back farther than that. I've never seen a group of people work harder outside of their own day-to-day businesses on anything. The level of commitment, the time, it's been extraordinary, and people will never know what the OCA and its membership have been doing to move this issue. So given that, I think we should close by asking you, other than the self-interest, other than the fact that this is your livelihood. That's a given. Why have you been doing this? Why is it so important that our kids come back to camp?
A quick little anecdote to amplify how important camp is and how long lasting even the simplest of messages that children get. I got an email, and I think it's a worthwhile, quick little story. An email out of the blue from someone I have no clue who this person is. He lives in California. He was at our camp in 1965 for one summer as a dishwasher. And he wondered if my dad, who owned it then, was alive. And he just, all he had to say was, you know, I don't remember much about the kitchen, but I remember your dad coming into the kitchen and looking me in the eye and asking me about my family and what my background was. That's in 1965. So what's the message? Our staff, camps, I tell our staff this all the time, that they are agents of change for the better. And that's why we run our camps, because we think that we can help make this world a kinder, gentler place, and that we can make leaders and give kids, as Emma and Marika and everyone else has said in their own way, that they can come back to camp this summer and realize that they do have resiliency and that they can and have coped. And it's a time for them to rediscover what real life is about. So that's what I'm in it for. And I think that every other camp director is, I hope, nodding their heads and saying, yeah, that's what camp is about.
You know, in the last little while, we have so many people who are involved in this issue and have lent their time and their energy. And they're not all directors, and they're not all owners, and they're not all the doctors. I've started to refer to them as friends of camp, at least in my shorthand as I'm talking about it. And certainly the three of you are friends of camp. And we are, you know, we're thankful for your friendship. We are thankful for your advocacy. We are thankful for what you're doing for our kids. And I'm thankful for your time tonight. So thank you.
Thanks for having us.
That's been a lovely conversation. Thanks for having us.
I loved it. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Are you a good camper?
At camp, yes, but at home, not so much.
What do you most look forward to about going back to camp?
Seeing all my friends.
All the friends.
My friends.
My friends.
Doing all the fun activities that you can't always do at home. You can't always go doing archery because you may put an arrow in someone else's yard.
It's also good for people to have camp because you can learn stuff.
What kind of things would you want to learn at camp this summer?
Learn how to do a backflip full.
Your body doing a backflip? Wow. During cabin cleanup in the morning, what's your favorite chore?
I like sweeping.
I like sweeping and like setting up the shoes, sitting on my bed.
And not participating. Do you have a favorite camp meal?
I'm a big noodle person, so probably mac and cheese.
Camp mac and cheese often is like baked on top, right?
Oh, yes.
And you like that?
Yes, with the elbow noodles.
Any pasta, they make macaroni, they make bolognese.
I really like their spaghetti there.
You know what? Today, a lot of kids answer that their favorite camp food is spaghetti and noodles. Would you rather live your whole life with counselors or parents?
Counselors.
I won't tell your parents you said that. Are you a top bunk or bottom bunk person?
Usually bottom.
Top bunk.
Bottom bunk.
My friend Violet is across from me, so we put a blanket on top and then this way, so we have a little fort.
Why do you think camp is so important for kids?
It's good for your mental health. Kids need to stay active.
You are going to make an excellent parent one day, my friend. Because no one told you to say that right now, right?
No.
Well, there's a lot of things that I miss about camp that I'm looking forward to. It's just a really peaceful, fun place.
It's positive to me, energetic, and it's just like entering heaven to me.
It's still cold up here, but warmer weather is on the way. Are you hoping for camp this summer? Of course, so are we. Amidst this very serious spring wave, we still think it's better to have a vision for summer, albeit an optimistic one, than to have no plan at all. And we believe kids, after all they've been through, deserve to be at the center of that planning. If our camps are to open, we need to start planning now. We need to make it known that our plan for camp isn't just the lofty dreams of one industry, but in the hearts and wishes of parents and children across the province. It will only take a minute. Go now to planforcamp.ca and choose one action. Health professionals can read and sign the letter we've prepared. Kids can make a camp craft. Members of the media can help us spread the word. And most importantly, parents, like me, can make our wishes known to our local MPP. Let's do so in our own voice and tell them what we want. If the pandemic subsides, our kids belong at camp this summer. At the risk of sounding a little campy, a well-constructed campfire has logs that lean on each other and rely on each other for support. And each new log in the fire makes the fire burn brighter. Please take a moment to help us light the path to camp this summer. Thanks for watching, everyone.
I have stood in a melody, tune that falls and rises endlessly, even when it can seem off key. It's a song you know by heart, and the words are in everything, lyrics strung upon their reasoning. Even when it can hurt to sing, we must all play our part. After the rain comes flowers like you never seen. Everyone knows the winter must come before spring. This is a song that we must sing. Know what I mean? Know what I mean? So goes everything. So goes everything. Yeah.
You guys killed it.
That was
likewise.
That was
Great story.
Fantastic.
It's a true story.
That was
that little email. It made me cry when I got it.
Jack, like there were multiple times in this conversation that I was weepy because of the things both of you were saying.
I almost lost it.
I can add more tears in the edits. Don't worry. Like I'll make it look really realistic.